Cynicism is just another form of cowardice. For our sergeant are not interested in a midlife crisis. We were to do our freaking work.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of the Spotlight Podcast, Success Stories for Veterans, where it is our job to break down and analyze heavy hitters in both the military and civilian communities to discover their tactics, their mindset, and their systems so that you can take those and apply them to your life. Now, those heavy hitters range from New York Times bestselling authors to former heads of state and to other divergent thinkers who are dominating their field by challenging conventional wisdom. And today we're interviewing Garett Cross. And Garett, in addition to being a contributor to the Spotlight Podcast, is also one of the rare breed of people to have a very successful and seamless military transition without experiencing the existential crisis many of us run into. Garett has great insight on keeping things together while transitioning out of the military. So take notes.
The reason that I wanted to interview you for this, because one, you're a co-host now. Right. You're on the ship. And the reason I asked initially is because as far as people who've gotten out of the military, today's conspiring.
Modern technology.
Today's conspiring against me, I swear to God. Shut up. I always have my phone on silent, but today.
Not today.
Not today. Not while I'm right in the middle of recording. Why would I? But as far as people that I've known that have gotten out of the military, you've had one of the smoother transitions that I've ever seen without the psychological valley that tends to be associated with most people's transitions. And what was it that you think made the difference there for you versus maybe other veterans that you've known? What did you do differently?
I don't know if I necessarily did anything differently. I think it came down to perspective. When I was in, I could have very much done my job for the rest of my life. Like, I wouldn't have loved it. I would have, it would have been a 9 to 5, or, well, in the military's case, like a 5 to 5, but I could have done it if I wanted to, but it wasn't, I would have been settling. And so I didn't want, I didn't want that lifestyle for forever. I wanted a little bit more out of this existence than just to just get by. And so it wasn't satisfactory to me. And so when I started looking at, law school and whatnot, I had still 2 years left in my commitment. So I had a lot of perspective, and I knew exactly what I didn't want from the life, as it were. And I knew where I wanted to go. And so it was just basically then connecting those dots and then what I had to do in the meantime to kind of get by.
It's interesting that you bring up the point about knowing what you don't want, because I actually think that that's one of the challenges, and it seems counterintuitive.
Right.
Because in most of the time I would counsel people, don't start with the negative, start with the blue sky thinking. But it's interesting because it seems like as people are getting out of the military, you don't know what you don't know about the civilian side of things. So really you have to kind of start from identifying what you don't want. And you talked about your perspective being different because of that. I'm curious, are there any books that you have that you recommend that have helped shape that perspective a little bit?
Yeah, one book that I really enjoyed it's called The Keen Edge. And this guy, I forget the author, but it's basically like the entire mantra of the book is that our heroes are often like analyzed, after they've kind of done all of these great things. But when you peel back the onion a little bit, you realize that it was small and consistent steps taken towards one larger goal. Whether it's waking up every day at 5 a.m., going to the gym, and that's just your ritual. And then you start working on a project, or you start working on something that you care about. And then eventually all of that leads up to a very, very real and tangible success. The guy provides a parable of, it's kind of silly, but 2 frogs fall into this bucket of cream. And one frog immediately goes, "There's no way out," after trying for minutes. He's like, "I'm never going to make it out of here." And he takes a giant gulp, and dies and falls to the bottom. A little morbid. The second frog...
Is this a German fairy tale? Or?
It could be. I don't know. The second frog, however, continues to swim, and he continues to try to figure out how to get out of this this bucket, how to get out of this problem. And by continually swimming in the cream, he actually turns it into butter, which gives him enough leverage to basically climb to the top of the butter and then jump out. So I think a lot of us, we always focus on the problem and not necessarily the solutions to it. It's like, I think Simon Sinek puts it best. It's like standing at the foot of the mountain and looking at how much you have to climb. But in reality, all you have to do is take a look at the step in front of you and take that step. Yeah. And then you take the next one. So I think that the whole book is basically about that. Just taking small, easy goals, whether it's diet, exercise, your career, and moving in a direction that is beneficial to grow those things.
Yeah, nobody wants to be a frog in cream.
No.
That is arguably the most bizarre parable I think
it's
I've
bizarre,
ever heard, but it clearly stuck.
It stuck with me. I was like, I can so very clearly in my mind see these two frogs, And I think a lot of people fall into the trap of feeling like they're a victim, like blaming the world for how hard their life is. And in reality, like, life just happens, man. Life's a verb. It happens to you, but what you choose to do with it, that's on you.
So you read The Keen Edge and you pulled the parable in small steps, and that's your takeaway. And are there any other books, maybe more action oriented in terms of like actually developing the systems that you use on a day-to-day basis?
I would say the one book that I really enjoyed, another one was Why Great Leaders Eat Last, and that's by Simon Sinek. And that's not necessarily specific to me personally, but it's more of a book on leadership. And I think that while it's not necessarily specific, I think all of the reasons and the ways you go about kind of going through your day has a drastic impact on you personally, and then how others perceive you. And I think that while it's very general, I think it can be applied for people who are going to law school, for the guy who wants to be an electrician, the garbage man. I think it's for everybody. So I wouldn't say there's anything specific. I mean, there's no magic recipe. I think there's no one size fits all solution. You just have to figure out, what you want, and then kind of go in line and take those steps to make butter.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting. I like Simon Sinek a lot, and I think that he gives great models and frameworks that you can plug in. And he is constantly talking about finding your why, finding your why, finding your why.
Yep.
I find that when I'm talking to people, a lot of veterans still struggle with that question. What's my why? What's my purpose? What's my mission? How do you go about framing yours in your head?
I would say I would probably segment it. I would basically chunk out the things that I know for sure are most readily in front of me. So for right now, it's law school and getting a job after that. Like that's my main focus. That's where my energy goes. That's where my attention is. Not to say that I don't do things, go to bars and hang out and enjoy football and do all those fun things, but I think you need to segment small goals towards a much larger one. And a lot of people look at it and they're like, oh man, that guy's so lucky, man. Gosh, he's just got everything going for him. But no one ever sees the magic behind, no one ever sees the hard work and the 5 a.m. workouts, the, staying up late and working and something like that. So I would say the best thing to do is just understand what you want and then segment those out into very tangible and very pragmatic goals, and then just chunk away at them one at a time. And eventually it looks like magic, but it's actually very, very simple. It's just, the thing is, and this as well as everyone else, people don't want to start. They'd rather complain. It's because it's easier, and I think all of us fall into that trap at some point or another. And they begin to realize that, or at least assume that the world is just happening to them. It's like life happens to everybody, and that's a great equalizer. but we don't get to control how life happens to us, but we do get to control how we react to things. And I think that's the number one thing, is just that perspective. Yes, life gets hard at some points, and it's stupid and things, you got to do it. And that's one thing I think the military teaches, from Marine perspective, or anybody in the DoD, is like, you're going to have to just grin down and bear it sometimes. You're just going to have to suck it up. Like, it sucks, but it'll end. Eventually, it'll end.
Yeah, and you hear Mattis talking a lot about commander's intent, and to me, that is analogous with starting with why.
Right.
Demonstrating that intent within your life, because people, at least my experience has been that they want to define the purpose narrowly, as in there's just one thing. I've seen people be very successful just by describing what their intent for their life is. Be like, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, because you can't know what you're going to do until you understand why you're going to do it, right? What's your overall strategy? And the people that I've seen be really successful have more of a general framework of who they want to become, right? And if you don't know, model people that you admire. Mattis would be one for me. Another guy would be Jocko Willink. Another guy would be my dad. Those are the types of men that I want to become. And what I forced myself to do was sit down and describe their traits. Right. Because you were talking about perception earlier, and how do I want to be perceived, when everything's been being written on the stone at the end of it. And again, it's that kind of that morbid frog in the cream. But it does. You're right. It comes down to just sitting down and doing that mental legwork, because it's actually really uncomfortable.
100%. And I think the best thing to do is self-reflection. Like, I think it was previous CEO of Apple, and I'm blanking on his name, Steve Jobs. One of the great, just some CEO.
Just that guy.
One of the greatest, CEOs of all time.
I would say that's debatable, but he's well known.
He's well known. And he basically had a quote, and he said, I like to wake up in the morning and I look myself in the mirror, and if this was my last day to live, would this be the thing that what I'm about to do, is this what I would like to die doing, basically? Yeah. And he goes, and if anything, if that answer is the same for more than a few days in a row, I need to know I need to make a change, So law school is a little bit different, because it's just something to get through. Not, I think it's just a time-based orientation, which is unfortunate. But that's pretty much, if you're waking up and you're hating yourself and your job, the first thing you need to do is look at yourself and see what you're doing to benefit. Once again, it comes back to, you're not a victim. It does require a little bit of effort, not a lot. You'd be amazed on how much you get from being kind and being useful to other people. Yeah. It goes a hell of a long ways. You don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the fastest. You don't have to be, even the hardest working. But if you're just kind and useful, I think that you go very, very far in moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Somebody once described kindness as fishing with dynamite to me.
That's great.
And the reason that they describe it, and it takes a shift in mindset from that scarcity based, if they win, I lose. They're like, no, man, if I can make people win, and that's what I'm known for, is making winners, that makes me look good also.
Absolutely.
Even if the win is never attached to my name, because those people will ultimately realize, and some people are immediately people are like, well, there's people all the time who just screw people over. I'm like, you can't base your system off the exception rather than the rule. And the reality is, if you show up and you're known for being that person who always has something useful in hand, be like, hey, I thought you might need this, life gets very easy.
Yeah.
And it's little stuff.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times you're just that little something, even if it's just a thank you card, you can get all kinds of information from somebody after that. And infinite information is so valuable. I actually think that information is more valuable than money, but
100%. And Simon Sinek, actually, he talks about that kind of very same thing. If he comes up to you and he says, you invite him over for dinner, and you send a text or an email the next day. Hey, thanks for inviting me over. I had a great time. Okay, cool. You're gonna look at it like that was nice. But if the dude sends you a handwritten note, that was picked out by him specifically and put it on your desk or mailed to your house, you're gonna be like, wow, that took time. It took effort. Did it take a lot of effort? No, it probably took him no more than a couple of minutes. And to me, organizationally, I think that's the number one thing that people do. Like email is a rational tool, and it's really good for conveying large pieces of information, but it's very, very, very bad at providing perspective and emotion, because I think we've all been in the case where you get an email and you're like, that sounds a little snarky, and all of a sudden you have this perception of this person who may or may not have ever intended as such. And, and that's why I always think face-to-face conversations are just the best,
Absolutely.
Even in the law firm that I'm working at right now, like it's a small office, but I just get my butt up out of my desk and I go talk to somebody if I have a problem.
Yeah.
It's just easier. You convey that information in a much more real and tangible way, as opposed to just, is it easier to send an email? Sure. But it requires just a tiny bit of effort in order to get up and do it. So.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly efficiencies, but I think you're right. I think people hide behind email now as opposed to.
And technology in general. I mean, you look at the internet and it's just it can be a phenomenal place on some levels, and it can be just downright dirty, in others.
Well, it's fascinating from just a strategic standpoint, because if you're a veteran getting out and you understand fundamentally that face-to-face conversation has fallen by the wayside, what has also fallen by the wayside is the gatekeepers that used to prevent face-to-face interactions with decision makers.
Absolutely.
It's one of the job areas that's actually being cut, because you can use technology. Well, what's fascinating is if you're the person that's willing to physically show up, oh my God, you are the person that wins every single time, because you could be at one of the most important events and there's just an empty lobby because people don't like to show up anymore. They'd rather sign in and watch digitally, which is fine. But understand that there's a strategic advantage to being that face-to-face interaction type.
And the thing is, and when we were talking to Mattis, I think he hit it like nail on the absolute head, is you can teach anybody, anything. And in any marketplace, anywhere, I could teach anybody. What you can't judge is effort.
Yeah.
And if you show up, you're 90% successful already. That 10% of just willingness, and you just try, people will work with you all day. And I would rather hire someone or work with someone who cares just a little bit and just puts in the effort, as opposed to the most brilliant person in the world who sits behind their desk and writes emails.
Yeah.
Because I don't care to work with that person.
Well, those are the types of people, in at least in my experience, that bail all the time, right? Those are the people that bail on you last minute. Those are the people that you were relying on, and they're really intelligent, but they also know, I don't really have to do it. And so they become unreliable. And that's become not kind of mainstream. It's actually becoming very mainstream, is something I've noticed, is that last minute, like, hey, sorry, can't do it. And that sets the bar so low, which is fantastic, because it's so easy to step over.
Get people to show up.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you think about it, like just get in your car, go somewhere for an hour to two, it doesn't take much, but it makes all the difference. It'd be like telling your folks, hey, I know I can't make it home for the holidays, but I'm going to Skype in.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
There's something missing there. Grandma and grandpa don't care to see you on a computer screen during the holidays.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I don't know.
They don't get your musk that way.
Yeah, they don't. They don't get those pheromones.
Exactly. They lose all the essence. So tell me about, you've had a pretty smooth transition, but tell me about a failure maybe that you've had that you would define as maybe your favorite failure that taught you something that you absolutely needed to know.
So when I was in the military, this was about, I want to say it was about almost two years ago. In the military, when, at least for the Air Force, after your 2-year mark, you fill out a dream sheet. I told my functional, the guy who basically decides where you go and when, that I didn't want to fill one out and I didn't want an assignment, because I knew I was getting out and I was going to go to law school. So when my cycle came up, they passed me over like I requested, because I didn't want to take somebody's spot. Because the way it works, you can't really trade anymore. You used to be able to like trade assignments with folks. Can't really do that. And the last thing I wanted to do is take someone's number one spot to somewhere, X, and then them not get it, and then me turn it down. So I told them that. I got passed over, which is exactly what I wanted. And then this job came available in California. And it was a teaching position at our schoolhouse down in Vandenberg, Southern California. Gorgeous, 70 degrees, wonderful place. And I was like, man, I mean, it would delay law school by 1 year, but I'd get the hell out of Wyoming. That'd be sweet. And then I could go to California and hang out and teach. It's a relatively easy gig. And then I got the job, which was great. Started moving out. Cassie put in her notice. You know, we were headed out. She was actually flying out the same weekend. I found out that my commander had halted and put a kibosh on my orders. Did not talk to me about it prior. Didn't email me. No notice. All of a sudden, he calls me into his office and says, "I've canceled your orders." With no, like, he didn't consult with me, my commander. I had no notice. I was literally blindsided. And I basically pleaded with the man to basically not. I was like, you don't know what you're you don't know what you're doing right now. So then I had to get in my car, tell my landlord to let me keep my house because I had already given him notice.
Yeah.
Luckily, they had already shown it to new owners. And they hadn't actually legally signed everything. And so we technically were still in ownership and they let us keep it because we paid on time. Cassie's job let her come back after pleading and whatnot. So, I mean, it was a very it was a big roller coaster and a big hurdle for both of us. But what it taught me is sometimes you're just not always in control. And even though it doesn't feel in the moment, it doesn't feel like a learning opportunity, that totally was. Because I'm at the point in my life now where it's like, I have no idea where I'm going to end up in 5 years. I always hate that question when employers ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Probably not working for you. You know, like, honest, like in the modern day, most people move between jobs 1 to 3 years, you know. So it's like, I don't know where I'm going to be 5 years, but I'm at peace with that because I know who I am. I know that I'm going to be successful. I'm going to work hard where I am. I'm going to grow where I'm planted, and we'll see what happens. And I think the best thing is you got to, if you don't have faith, if you don't have a spiritual existence or a spiritual belief in something bigger, the best thing I think you can invest in is yourself, and you can just believe in your ability to get things done. And so that was a really huge learning opportunity for me because even when I felt like the chips were down and like literally even my own commander, someone who's supposed to have your back, basically turned on you and didn't care about your existence, you can still get it done. You know, I still, finished my time out there, got into law school using the GI Bill. I'm here now. And while it was very difficult at the time, I think that failure of mine to not even have the perspective that things are subject to change, I could have very easily been like, this sucks, my life is terrible, blah, blah. And I could have very easily fallen into that trap. So I always go back to that and just have faith in myself. And then obviously, I have a great spouse, so that helps.
Yeah, well, that definitely does help. But I think that you're absolutely right in that you can actually win people in those scenarios by responding well, especially when other people realize that it's bullshit.
Yep.
Right. It might not be the impression on your commander, but maybe it was the XO who saw like, wow, here's this young captain who's responded very maturely to a situation completely outside of his control, and he's still hooking and jabbing as a response instead of wallowing in self-pity.
Yeah, I think it's good. And I go back to it, and we don't get to control how the world happens to us. Sometimes life just happens. You get fired with a moment's notice, or a family member dies all this out of the blue. But we do get to control our reaction. And I think that those times of self-reflection when you can look yourself in the mirror and be like, all right, what's going on? What are the implications here? What do I need to do? And I know that's a very rational and not lack of emotional way of looking at things. I'm not saying you can't have emotions, but I think that time to basically sit back and kind of turn your brain on and just kind of look at yourself and see where you are and what you're doing. I think those are like the best moments that you can have with yourself.
Yeah, I actually believe that you physically need to do that. And, a lot of intelligent people tend to see that statement as a metaphor. I believe that you should literally physically talk to yourself in the mirror, and try to take that objective.
If that's what it takes.
That objective view, argue against yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the best things that you can do. Be like, well, is that really the case? Be your own devil's advocate, because you are ultimately your best psychologist, because you know when you're lying and when you're not.
Exactly.
And
when what you're doing is right and wrong. And if you know it's wrong, you got to stop it at some point, man.
Yep.
So
I completely agree. So One thing that I think everybody knows about you, you're a pretty weird guy.
Yeah, it's true.
So tell me, is there an unusual or absurd thing that you love that you wish more people knew about that would just make their life better?
I think you and I have talked about this at length. I am a giant fantasy nerd. When I was a kid, my dad is probably, I still remember it to this day. My dad gave me this old, like the original, maybe not the original binding, but it was the original cover to The Hobbit, which is still probably my favorite book of all time. And I love getting immersed into a story, a world that's completely separate from reality.
Yeah.
It's kind of my way of self-meditation, where I can basically just turn my mind off of reality, and I can just kind of go into a world that's completely, foreign and different and crazy with dragons and cool stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge nerd when it comes to that. I love fantasy novels. Probably my absolute favorite type of book to read. But yeah, I think it's important. I think everyone has a vice out there. I don't trust a man or woman who doesn't have a couple of vices.
So you're saying that fantasy's your vice?
I mean, it's a good release mechanism. So yeah, I would consider it a vice. I enjoy, it's easy for me to like unwind at the end of the day by reading, about some wizard blowing the tower up with a giant spell.
Oh yeah, dude,
I mean,
I'm all the way
as
in
weird
there.
as that sounds, but orcs and elves and dwarves
I
and stuff.
absolutely love fantasy too. When
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the Dresden Files, but
Yep.
to call it a vice, I feel like maybe you have to be going to like Comic Cons.
Oh yeah, I don't go that. I don't.
Are you in that deep?
I don't go that deep. I'm not a cosplayer. I'm a fan, but I am not an active participant in that. Not to say there's anything wrong with it. I mean, I'm of the belief you like what you like, and if that gets it done for you, then you do whatever you do. I prefer to read in my own bedroom. I'm not going to dress up. It's just not my thing. But yeah, I would say I
want to believe
not a
that you
vice.
don't dress up. I want to believe that you're not there in your room with a set of elf ears on and be like,
we'll never know.
Legolas, what a champion.
He was phenomenal.
Yeah, he is.
But yeah, I think maybe a vice is too strong, but definitely like a release,
Yeah, absolutely.
And another release for me would be, like the gym. Like I believe personally that the gym is the best form of challenging yourself, because the best part, if like, for instance, for anyone who's ever done a pull-up, I don't care how big you are. I don't care how strong you are. I don't care how fat or thin you are. A pull-up is a pull-up because you always have to be, it's you against you. You're literally fighting gravity every single time you do one. Same thing with anything else in the gym. So I think whenever you go into the gym, you come in that mind like, it's all relative to me, and everything I'm about to do is basically just making my own self better.
Yeah.
And so like that, I always call it like my dojo. That's my happy place. And so that's where I go to work on myself physically. And then sometimes I guess I would look at, my release of books, and, fantasy novels and whatnot as my release of my mind.
Have you ever considered combining the two? Like maybe you go to the gym and start practicing your bow staff skills or something.
It hasn't come up, but I don't think I will either. I don't think I'll do that. Another thing that I've been trying to get better at is meditation. And I know that sounds
I gotta get better at meditation.
Yeah, a lot of folks.
That's the CrossFit of the mind sports.
It's actually very challenging. It's basically this idea of you kind of, you pay attention to your body and how you feel, and then you cast away your thoughts, where you basically think about nothing. You focus on breathing, and I know a lot of folks are probably like, oh, here comes the hippie talk, but it's actually very effective. And I've been trying it, especially before, like I go to bed at night, and it's actually a very good way to release stress and provide calm and, tranquility of the mind. And if someone ever has to go to bed and they, they're having their minds racing a million things per minute, it's actually a very good way to kind of quiet those thoughts, and that way you can just actually become more peaceful.
Well, there's actually like actual physiological responses that occur, and I personally am about that Wim Hof life. I'm a huge fan of what he does, and he talked. First of all, the best way to achieve alkalinity in your body, and this is according to UCLA as well as Wim Hof, is to oxygenate your body through your lungs. Like that's where all that acidity will actually come out. That's the most effective way to get there. In addition to that, there's actually a physiological response in your pineal gland. If you hyperoxygenate your blood, it basically produces an adrenaline shot, and then all of the other chemicals that are associated with that. And then there's whole studies on the fact that you can actually release DHT in within your brain once you actually go in that deep. And Wim Hof that guy's insane, the stuff he's doing.
It's one of those things.
Hippie breathing techniques.
I mean, yeah, but it also goes. I mean, it goes for a lot of different things. Like, you know, people talk about like a runner's high. I've never had it. I hate running. I do run, but I've never had a runner's high. I always feel like death afterwards. But like when I go to the gym and get a good workout in or something like that, I always feel fantastic.
Yep.
The next morning I might be sore and, you know, things hurt and whatnot, but it releases those same endorphins, and it makes you more alert. It really is like a kind of a vice, in my opinion.
Well, dude, it's a cheat code.
Yeah, it's like you literally, if you're tired, go work out. You'll be less tired. Like, I guarantee. Like, even though you're exerting energy, your brain, your mind, like that oxygen, like he's talking about, that goes into your body. Like, man, it's good. Like, you get your heart rate up, man. Go for a run. Like, and that's the thing is, like, people, just because you need to work on something doesn't mean you sit in an office or a room or a library for hours upon hours upon hours. Like, you gotta get some energy. Go run. Go for a walk. Like, you know, walk around. I don't care. Do something. You know.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be this grand event. Like, I enjoy going to the gym, but one thing that I do, I'm down to 2 days a week right now where I can do heavy strength training just because that's all the time I have to dedicate to it.
Yep. Today was actually the first time I've been in a while, which is really unfortunate because I actually do miss it. Like, I really miss the way I feel after it. So.
Exactly. So one thing you can do, and one thing that I do, for those of you who are familiar with the Pomodoro technique, basically it's 25 minutes of focused work on, 5 minutes off, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off.
And that way you know you're getting that break.
Exactly. So what I do during that break is I crank out 50 push-ups.
There we go.
So
maybe start with 10
if you don't have to do 50, but start where you start, right?
Yeah.
I started out, I was doing 30. Now I'm already
starting with 1 is a hell of a lot more than you were doing before.
Exactly. So now I look at it, I'm like, okay, even on days where I don't go to the gym, I at least get in 500 push-ups throughout the day. My overhead press numbers have gone up. My bench press numbers have gone up. It's been huge.
And I guarantee you that you're more alert when you're working. You're getting that oxygen in the brain. You're thinking clear. You're thinking faster. Those neurons are firing and everything. I mean, it's just good.
One of the only ways to create neurons that they've discovered past a certain point, post-pubescence, is to work out. The other one is to like develop this utopic environment that where you're at your absolute creative best, which is, you know, hit or miss. That's why when you hear people saying like, I'm not motivated, what they're saying is I'm not finding myself in this perfect creative environment
right
that I require. It's the only other way to do that. And I'm basing this off of Learning to Learn with Barbara Oakley, and they were talking about the importance of exercise within that. The only other way to do it is to exercise once you get past a certain age, and that's the only way to keep yourself sharp mentally. And some people, you know, there's this whole thought process that, only meatheads really enjoy the gym. Some of the smartest people I know, up to and including Socrates, speak about the importance of physical fitness.
Well, I mean, you go back to our conversation with Madison. The first thing he was talking about, especially for vets, because we're all used to getting up at 04 and, you know, running laps and doing burpees and crap that we all hate. But there's such an important and subtle, substantial difference in doing that, especially when becomes a habit. You know, you do everything for 3 weeks. Like, my body just wakes up at 5 a.m. now. Like, it does not matter if it's the weekend. It sucks, but I mean, I get a hell of a lot more done, and I am motivated to go to the gym. You do that for 3 weeks, and I guarantee you'll see a difference.
Well, dude, even the guys at Echelon Front, like Jocko Willing, like Bevan, all those guys, they have all of their people that they're training wake up and do PT. And everybody worships the ground these guys walk on. And it's such a simple shift, but the momentum it creates throughout your day or your week, your month, your life, suddenly you start getting some of that confidence back, and it's just from little shifts like that.
Yep.
And I know there's always people like, oh, I know fitness, and they're like, well, if you ain't where you're at, where you want to be physically, in my opinion, that should be your focus. That's an easy place to start. Nobody can take credit for that work. You either did it or you didn't.
Yep.
And that's it.
And that's another thing is a lot of folks, and I caution especially a lot of people that I meet, I'm like, do not confuse movement with progress. Just because you either A, say you're doing a lot, or B, just because you are doing a lot, doesn't mean you're getting a lot more done. You know, if you're not using your energy and your motivation and you're putting in those in directions that are actually worthwhile, that your direction also has to be focused, you know, very, very like tight focus onto the things and the objectives that you want. But yeah, fitness found me in college, and I've never looked back. I'm not a meathead per se, but I do enjoy going in and getting a good lift in and doing some cardio and getting my heart rate up and sitting in the sauna. It's awesome.
Well, I agree, dude. And the effects as you age, I mean, are disproportionate just because, you know, I'm entering in my mid-30s now.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to see guys my age just really falling off the face of the cliff. And I'm like, dude, you look like you're 45, 50 years old. This is disgusting.
There was an older guy in the gym, and there's a lot of older guys at the gym that I go to, but this old man was, for the lack of a better word, he was jogging. He was jogging at a pace that I could walk and keep up with him. But if that guy has the time, and this is at like 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
If he has the time, you know he ain't going to work. Like, he's got nothing else going on, but he gets up in the morning and he's going to go run laps. If he can do it, you don't have an excuse. Like, you just don't, you know.
Yeah.
I've seen folks have broken arms and stuff, and they're still in the gym doing something, you know, on the elliptical, on the bike. It's just important. It's so important. And I know for a lot of folks, it's just hard, but yeah, like, it doesn't get easier as you get older. It really doesn't.
Well, a lot of people also approach it from like the I have to do this mindset instead of I'm going to, or I get to go do this, because there are people that would give anything to be able to do a squat because their legs don't work or they don't have them anymore.
Right.
And things like that. And if you are finding yourself in a shape that you don't appreciate,
it is ultimately your responsibility to do something about it.
Exactly. It is absolutely your responsibility to do it. So what advice then, Garett, would you give to an ambitious, driven veteran about the return to the civilian world? And what advice do you think that they should ignore?
Oh boy. I would say for the most part, people look at veterans a little bit differently, and depending on their background, civilians will look at you I would feel like one of two ways. They will either look at you with admiration, which is like, oh, thank you for your service, you're looking at your background and whatnot. And the other one I would say is one of caution. A lot of folks are kind of sometimes put off by military members, and that's because sometimes they have bad interactions with them. So I would say know who you are. And then if someone perceives you improperly, you need to A, look at what you're doing to give off that vibe, and then B, do something about it. Talk to that person or talk to the organization, or, look at yourself in the mirror and see what you can do better. I pride myself on being the quiet one necessarily. I like to listen a lot to other folks and what they say and then give my opinion. Simon Sinek, once again, I hate to sound like I'm just reiterating him, but he always says, like, be the last to speak. Let everyone else give their opinion so that everyone else feels like they've been heard, and then provide your input. And that's what leaders do. That's what decision makers do. They allow everyone to feel valued, and they allow everyone to feel included, but not and heard. And that way everyone's on board, even if a decision is contrary to what they think. And a lot of times I think for vets, you come from an area when rank is everything. You know, if a guy higher rank than you comes up to you and gives you an order, you do it. It's not even a question. That doesn't happen in the civilian community very much. It can at certain levels, but it's not as prevalent. You don't have that kind of same structure hierarchy that you do. So be cognizant of that. And I think that if you approach people as a hammer, and if you view the world as a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think you get a hell of a lot more flies than you do with honey, than you do with vinegar. So, I mean, I think you just, like I said, it goes back to being kind and being useful. So you don't need to railroad people just because they don't do what you ask. A lot of times you just have standards, hold people accountable to those standards, and then help them if they're not performing. And if they're not willing to perform, well, that's on them, and that's not your responsibility. You are not responsible for someone else's happiness. So if someone's not motivated to do something, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do about it. Let it go and move on. And then just basically either the world will work itself out with them, or they'll figure it the hell out.
Yeah, it's just you bring that up because when somebody that we're both a fan of, Gary Vaynerchuk, one of the things he talks about with salespeople, and I think this is very applicable across the board, is he talks about don't waste your time trying to convince people. Go find the people that already understand,
right,
and work with them. And I think that the temptation sometimes is to kind of ram your head through that brick wall because you want to get through to somebody or you want them to do what they're supposed to do. And the reality is on this side of the fence, that's not how shit operates.
Right.
And your best bet is to just go find the right person.
Yeah, I don't have time for it. It's just one of those things. Like if you want to work with me, dude, I'll be more than happy to sit down and help you out. Let's go over what you need to do, what you want to get done. But at the end of the day, it's on you. Yeah. You're responsible for your own happiness. And if I can't help you if you're not, I just can't help you.
Yeah. Trying to change a mind that's already made up is damn near impossible.
Yeah, it's a giant waste of their and your time.
Yeah,
more
exactly.
Specifically your time.
Yeah. And you see that manifest a lot in the sales world. People, they're just like, they send like the 500th email, and that's because some other salesperson who operates from a perspective of conventional transition wisdom of just smile and dial,
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I also don't. I think the one thing that vets have going for them, and then they don't use, or they may use improperly, is passive aggressiveness. Especially in civilian communities, it is rampant. I've seen a lot of, one person makes a mistake, and so the boss or the manager sends a mass email out, basically calling out one specific person, but passive aggressively that everyone has to read it. And the only thing that does is breed contempt among the other people. It doesn't do anything. And I think the one thing that military folks have at their disposal is direct.
Yep.
You don't have to be mean. You don't have to be an ass. But if you just convey, hey, this is the standard. You didn't meet it. Let's talk about why you didn't meet it and how we can do better and move on. And that's it. And if you just call a spade, life becomes much easier. And, and I think that's the one thing that vets really need to do is like, if someone is holding you back, then you'd be like, hey man, we're not doing that. Or, hey, I'm moving in this direction. You're moving to that. And if they're unwilling, then get rid of them. Like, it doesn't matter. It is quite honestly that simple.
Yeah.
And I think Gary Vee does a phenomenal job of conveying that. It's like, I don't need to convince you. I just need to find people who believe what I believe. And it's that simple.
Well, yeah. And, the things that people try to convince you of in that process, they'll basically just sit there and tell you that you're wrong. And one thing that I think we need to focus more on within the veteran community is teaching people how to identify people they shouldn't be listening to. Because what I see is a lot of people who mean well, but pull people off the track constantly because they're offering this half-baked advice because they're trying to make themselves feel better, even though they've never been where that person is trying to go. And to me, it's irresponsible.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to another episode of the Spotlight Podcast. And I just wanted to take a second to ask you who you think should be interviewed on the show. Who do you think is out there that's just absolutely crushing it that the veteran population needs to hear from? That's what we want to hear from you. Send us your suggestions to spotlight@thezenveteran.com. That's SPOTLIGHT @thezenveteran.com. Thanks again for listening.